words before I show the video. So over here, as you can see, these are modern colors, which are the equivalent of, pretty much close to the equivalent of Rembrandt's colors. Most of you probably don't have some of these colors.
No.
But so what I've done at the beginning of the video is shown how you can mix up, well, you can mix up the sap green, the Naples yellow, the carmine, and
those are the colors I don't have.
What?
So what I was trying to do, Anthony, that I was having problems was making these colors, the chart here that you have.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, because some of the stuff that's on your left, I don't have some of those colors. I was trying to make
no. You don't worry about the list on the far left.
Oh, okay.
These colors here are the equivalents of them.
Okay.
So if you have any of these colors, you can use them. But there are certain ones of these colors that you probably don't have. For instance, sap green, Naples yellow, carmine, or rose madder.
Yeah,
and then I didn't have those colors. I also didn't have, I didn't have, I think it was raw sienna. So I mixed up those colors, okay? And at the beginning of this video, I show you basically how to mix them. But the main thing is to get a palette that's as close as you can to this if you want to do this exercise. I'm not telling you you have to do this exercise, but you do learn a lot from working with it. Now, with it's important to remember though, when Rembrandt worked with this palette, he used hardly any blue and hardly any green. So if you're gonna try and do what he did, which is what I do in the video, you're gonna use those colors extremely sparingly. But I wanted to say, I mean, an exercise like this is a way of learning several things. First is learning how the advantages of a limited palette. You also learn something about what these artists of that period, including Rembrandt, were doing and how they how they got a lot of the effects they got. So I guess those are the main values. The other thing with my demonstration is how I apply paint. I think that might interest you, because especially if you want to do a painting fast and you need to apply several layers of paint and keep control. That's what this video will show you. The video is about 35 minutes. It took me about 3 hours to do the painting. So I'm giving you snippets of the process and trying to explain it. First, I'll just begin with the video now, and I'll just explain as we go the mixing of the palettes. Wait a minute. Oh, I know, I have to just pull it. Okay, now the first one, I'm gonna actually move through part of it because it took too long. The first color, I wanted to make something close to Rembrandt's blue with phthalo blue. And that's the one that was not 100% successful. And I won't bother you with the whole process. Okay. So I got a phthalo blue with white, and I just mixed in a little bit of the quinacridone red.
Quinacridone red?
What kind of red is that?
Quinacridone red? You have it.
I don't have it.
You don't have quinacridone red?
Quinacridone. Oh yeah, I do have it.
Of course you have it. Yeah. Okay, so that's as close as I could get to cobalt blue. Not a total success.
But how about if I have cobalt blue? I have two little tubes of cobalt blue.
If you have cobalt blue, you don't need to do that one.
Oh,
And you only need one of the blues. Here I'm taking cadmium yellow medium, mixing it, that's a gray, not a white, a very light gray. And then because it cools, it's a little too cool, I put in a little tiny bit of yellow orange. Because the yellow they used was not a super strong yellow. And cadmium yellow is very strong.
what color are you making with this?
I'm making the yellow they use. This is basically a Naples yellow.
Oh, okay.
The one that's on
I have Hansen
the color
yellow.
shop up there. You have what?
I have Hansen yellow.
Yeah, well, you have to do what I'm doing here. Now we're going to the green. The sap green. The sap green you can make from green gold and phthalo blue.
I have permanent green and so.
Well, you can make this many different ways. I'm just showing you one way.
Okay.
You have to use your imagination here in the mixing.
No, well, I mixed some colors and I got it almost.
Well,
So,
almost maybe enough.
okay.
Now I'm checking, I've mixed what is a match to the sap green, and I'm checking what happens when I put white with it, and that works too. So that one actually works quite well. And then I'm doing the carmine, which I take quinacridone red, and I mix it with just a tiny bit of Venetian red. And you get a pretty good carmine that way.
Okay.
Now the carmine was a modern color at the time. It came from the Americas. It comes from the excretion of a beetle. The Aztecs used to use it. And Caravaggio was one of the first artists to use the color. So, and the final one was burnt, because I didn't have burnt sienna. I had, it was burnt sienna that I didn't have. So, Venetian red, cadmium red, and a little bit of raw sienna, which I had. I'm still getting used to filming myself like this, so there were some things that, there were a few little problems here, but I think it pretty much works. But you see how I'm doing the mixing with the palette knife? Don't mix with your brushes, especially mixing up colors for a palette. See, what I'm doing is I'm mixing them on my palette, but then I'm putting them on another palette that I'm going to use for doing the painting. Unfortunately, you can't see I didn't realize you couldn't see the color chart at this point, so sorry about that.
Do you tend to remix, like mix small amounts and remix?
Well, I make small amounts, but then I mix enough. I mixed enough for this project. This is the still life, very traditional still life. The lighting changed totally while I was doing it because I'm working in the attic. I'm not used to working there. But anyway, and I also picked a still life with colors that were sort of in the range that the Rembrandt worked. And also I created a fairly strong lighting from the left, which actually gets stronger as the afternoon went on. So, and the painting, as you see, the painting reflects that. And here's the setup. Okay, having set up the palette, we're ready to go. Now, I'm going to use one of the more muted colors. For instance, the burnt umber. I'm gonna mix it with a little bit of white, just to lay in a very rough foundation here, beginning with a little bit of drawing, but not very much drawing. Now I've set this whole thing up so that I can transfer directly from the scene in front of me to the canvas, because I've got everything. I'm actually can use direct proportions, direct measurements, which makes life much easier.
I remember drawing that jug.
Yeah, I thought you would find it familiar.
Yeah.
And the apple is one of Jackie's apples. And I can begin even to block in light and shadow as I go. It's a little like watching grass grow, but it gets a little more interesting as we go on. Because this is a demonstration and it's taken so much time to just set it up, I'm not actually thinking very carefully about composition. On the canvas, I am thinking about other things like color and light and shadow and drawing. Now we have a book here, so we got to pay very close attention to the angle of that book. Size of that apple, which is actually larger. Jackie, you probably recognize this apple. That was for last night's. Unlike the squash, it's not real.
Is that the burnt sienna color?
Some perspective lines over here. So pay a little bit of attention.
Oh, okay.
They're not quite, the book is not quite lined up with the table.
How big is that canvas you're working on, Anthony?
I think it's something like 10 by 14 or something. I decided to mix some of my cobalt blue with the raw umber to make a more neutral color, something closer to a gray, which I think works better in the background. I'm still laying on the paint with a lot of thinner at this point. Not quite as much as I did at the very beginning, but so that I can move paint around and I can work on top of it while it's still wet. And I like that. And I think down at the bottom by the table, I'll make it even a little, I'll add even a little bit more blue. To basically gray out the color. And you also create a nice little warm, cool contrast. That same color, something very close to it, seems to me will work for the shadows on the table. So I start to work those in. table. I've mixed some of my green with some of my yellow ochre. Make a cool, neutral for behind at the back of the table, which isn't very brightly lit. Right now, I'm still working on the areas surrounding the objects. I'm not spending a lot of time on the objects right now. In fact, I'm not spending any time, but I will be. That same color might work as a base, at least. Now it needs to be lighter. Well, only slightly. The top of the bottle. So while I'm doing the other colors, I put that in up there. I also start to do some of the drawing just with the paint. And I'm seeing right away that my background is going to need to be darker. And this might be a good ground, something to put first on the squash in some areas. In a tiny bit more here. Now I'm gonna start laying in the apple. On the dark side, I'm gonna begin with something that's really a very dark color, like I'm thinking of using actually the burnt, the burnt sienna. For the shadow side. And I can take it a little bit further. Notice when I'm using the big brush, when I'm doing big areas, I use bigger brushes. I use a smaller brush here. I'm not really very particular about the brushes I use. Whatever works in a particular area, I'm going to use. I will talk more about brushes later. I'm seeing that my drawing of this art could go out a little bit further there. Also, the shadow, because the squash is on this book, so I'm going to use pretty much the same. And the book is very warm, it's colored, so I'm going to use the same color in the shadow on the book for the squash. And I'm going to outline the book very slightly with this same color. I'm going to go to my Venetian red for the apple as it moves into the light, because as it moves into the light, the color gets much stronger. Actually, sorry, I actually went to the Carmen, not the Venetian red. Excuse me. We don't actually have Venetian red on this palette. I lay color on, and then I'm going to lay color over later so that they blend nicely. At this point, we switch to vermilion. Not quite pure, but close to it. Not quite pure because we might want to accent it with pure color. This is where you're moving fast and you know you've got things about where you want them. This is where the palette knife comes in handy. And the thing with the palette knife is if you want the color to spread, you want to mix it with a little bit of thinner, and you don't scrub it on. You kind of, as much as possible, you float it with the palette knife on top of what you've already done. That's good for starters. Now, this area, bring back some of that shadow. I'm also noticing that in the shadow of the apple, it picks up some of the table, and there's a slight greenish tinge to it. Just a hint. I'm going to try and get by putting in the shadow something just a little bit lighter, with a hint of green in it. I don't know if this will work. Let's see if oh yeah, that should work. And I would actually go on top of that with something that's a little bit warmer and closer to the color of the surface, like that, to create the reflected light. Okay, now I'm going to go to the apple. I meant to say squash there. Starting to work on the squash a little bit here, and I'm using the palette knife so I can feed the color over color I've already put down here, just to speed up the process. I darkened the back of the table slightly because I realized, the squash wouldn't show up in the colors I want to use unless I did that. Laying down colors, even in the beginning with a palette knife, can be quite helpful. You get nice mixtures of color this way, subtle mixtures on the canvas. This squash, the green is very, very warm. It's almost an earth color, it's almost brown. It goes from green to brown. So I'm trying to get some of that in here. It also gets much lighter at the bottom and shifts hue into a sort of blue with just a hint of red in it at times. It's kind of a tricky color. So let's see what we can do here. We also need the shadow color over here on the squash, which is not green at all. Actually, it's more like a muted brown. And you can do, as you put in the color, you can actually do the drawing as well. Notice I'm just floating one color over another here in this area. I'm also going to go back into the pot and hit it with some stronger color to get closer to where we're going to be with it eventually. now I'm starting to block in the book of Courbet's work, and it's kind of handy. It's Courbet's painting at that time was very much the same palette, so it's very easy to find the colors. So the cover is kind of a mess, but that makes for an interesting challenge. Note that I don't do a lot of preliminary drawing. I block in shapes and then refine them later. It's a much easier and faster way to work, and actually can lead to a more accurate rendition of things. Having such a limited palette actually makes a lot of decisions easier. I'll detail his face later. Just putting in a color for his face, a color that's in the corner over his shoulder here, and that's about all I'm going to do immediately. I'm going to put the shadow under the cover. Which needs to be a bit darker and cooler, actually. Sometimes you get too much paint on, you just scrape it off with the knife and put the strong color that you actually want there. Like that. Or in here, notice that I don't get things right the first time. I go back into the wet paint and keep pushing the color, because in the process of struggling to get the right color, the right interaction of colors, I also get a lot of richness in the paint as it mixes on the canvas. And here I've discovered that working this essentially pink into the green at the bottom gives me the reflection I need down here to reflect the face of Courbet as it shows up in the bottom of the squash. Just putting his face back a little bit there. And over here, we get the reflection of the pot, which is really very strong. And so I'm using almost the same color as in the pot, just a little bit more muted, and running it against the side of the squash here. And of course it picks up, because the squash is mottled, the
yellow portion.
Mottled, M-O-T-T-L-E.
That very strongly. And I want to get some of that. It's all wet into wet here. A layer, a very thin layer, a knife layer, and then I'm going back to detail with the brush. And of course, it's quite possible to make a mess in the process. Maybe that's what I'm doing. I don't know. When I do highlights, I usually put 2 colors. It's a little different when I'm using such a limited palette, but I would do a color that is closer to the field, the color that the highlight is going on, as a transition from that to the highlight. So here I would do something like that. And then I would hit it with the highlight. Not everywhere, just so that there's a transitional color around the highlight. It's also very bright color here in the apple, so I'm going to put that in too. And we accent this. A little strong now. That bright yellow on the apple there.
Okay, that's the finished painting. But look at the palette. You see how colors are worked through each other, and one color leads to another color. Actually, I like the palette better than the painting. But the colors grow out of the initial interaction of the colors, rather than constantly mixing up new independent colors. Because that way you can judge very subtle transitions that you need on the canvas. Of course, the lighting changed rather significantly over the period of the painting. So what you see in the finished painting is not what you saw in the original photograph of the still life. Let's see, there's, well, this will give way in a minute to a full-on shot of the, there. So that's basically the finished painting. All done in about 3 hours.
Wow.
All wet on wet. Okay. Now, I don't know if you want to use the Rembrandt palette. It is kind of interesting. Notice how this palette really works to show off bright red, as we saw in his paintings, and with yellow secondary. Also, but if you don't want to use his palette, I would encourage you to work small and try to work paintings as far as you can while they're wet. It's good practice, and try to really use the palette knife. The palette, some painters just paint it, like Courbet did his paintings almost exclusively with the palette knife.
You know, it looked like, Anthony, you don't blend, I mean, you blend with the palette knife. Well, you don't really blend that much, it looked like to me.
Oh, I'm blending. All these colors have been blended with the palette knife on the, yeah, on the, you mean blend, you mean?
Well, like
brushes, you mean?
Yeah,
No.
you know, that kind of blended white. I mean, it's not, it's very loose the way that you were doing
Right.
it. Is that, am I correct about
Yeah,
that?
I think it's better when it's fresher, you know.
Okay.
But also you've got a lot of transitions in here, which are just working color against really close color with the knife. You can do it with a brush too. I'm not saying you should work the way I work, but I wanted you to see how you can move very fast. I don't think this is a great work of art. It's an exercise in representation using the Rembrandt palette. It's interesting though, it did give me, I've never used the Rembrandt palette before. It was kind of interesting because the result is akin to what he did, and I began to understand how he got there.
Yeah. I love the color of the bottle or jar in the back. I wish I could have seen you produce the color. It is red and what else? The bottle.
Well, there aren't many colors. It's one of the, it's like ochre with the red, or ochre with, depends. I mean, there are many ways to get a color. There's not a single way.
So this is combination of brush and a palette knife?
Well, I wash in over the whole painting. You see, the blending happens because I wash in color first over any area, pretty much any area.
I see.
And then I go back over with the palette knife with slightly stronger color. And sometimes a couple of times, and then I go back in with the brush to clarify things. You know, this could be carried further and tightened up, but
right.
I don't actually. I mean, I'm not that invested in it, but also, you know, it has at this stage, it has a freshness. You would wonder whether it would make sense to tighten it very much more, because when you tighten things, you take out some of the spontaneity.
Yeah, you lose something. I'm learning that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anthony?
And yes.
What I noticed almost when you were at the end of your painting was the palette was all mixed together. I mean, all the colors, you kept on kind of mixing them. So it wasn't a clear color that you made. They were all kind of mixed into each other. Especially the middle one. Yeah, you used a lot of that. It was just kind of like all mixed together.
Well, I mean, if you want to find if you're doing transitions on something and you want to find the next color, you want to work with the color you've already put down and work into it on the palette. Because the lighting on the palette is never the same as the lighting on your canvas. If you try to mix up separate colors on your palette and then put them on your canvas, there's going to be a disjointed quality.
That's how mine are. I mean, because I saw yours, and they're all entwined with each other.
Right.
You mix them,
one color breeds it. It's kind of like it's a little. One color breeds another by working with them. You know, the problem is sometimes the palette just gets out of control. What I'll do next time, next week I'm going to do another demonstration. It may be a painting I do outdoors, actually, which has a lot of problems because the light changes so fast. But I was going to just demonstrate creating a palette for a particular situation.
Oh.
Here we already have a palette that we're working with, but if you're on site, what are my color choices going to be for this particular situation? What's different, you know, I've had you, for the color exercises, I had you mix up all these specific colors, but that was to really control what you put on the canvas. When you're actually working on a painting, you don't want to have just discrete little piles. You want to have 2 or 3 kind of dominant colors that you keep working into and working variations of. A painting is much stronger when it has a fairly tight color scheme. I liken it to a theme and variations in music, you know. You take a few colors and you work them in the lights, you work them in the shadows, you know.
Are you still encouraging us to do a portrait with Rembrandt's palette?
If you know, that makes sense. He was mostly, actually Rembrandt was mostly a portraitist. That's how he made his living. And it's a palette that is perfectly adapted to portraits because it has a lot of earth colors, and then it has a muted yellow and a muted green and a little bit of blue. And with that, you can do faces brilliantly, you know. Yeah, I would encourage you to. If you're going to use this, if you're going to do the Rembrandt palette, you could also, Cassandra, use it outdoors. You know, it would be interesting to use it in an actual landscape. On the other hand, you don't feel like you have to use it at all.
Anthony, could I use Rembrandt's color for that voice painting? he's outdoor and he's young and he's kind of bright. And Rembrandt's color tends to be very kind of dark. Would you recommend his palette for that painting?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go quite as dark as this. Rembrandt didn't always, you know.
But you know, overall, his colors are kind of dark. So
Yeah, because it's chiaroscuro. The darkness sets off the light colors and creates a real drama. But it's up to you. You could use his palette and just play with doing it differently for the kid. You know, it's up to you.
Okay, I'll try.
But I would use the cool colors sparingly, the blue and the green.
And you're recommending it, I do, or we do it rather quickly.
Yeah.
In one shot painting. Is that right?
Yeah. If you don't have to,
No,
but
I'd like to try.
I would recommend with this palette doing a one-shot painting. I mean, Cassandra, you might just do a little preliminary study.
Yeah, I've been requested a portrait from my mother-in-law. So, send me a photo, and it has a similar palette, so I might do that.
Yeah, but try and do it fast.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you're going to try and do it fast, and it may be a mess. It's a learning process. Okay?
Yes.
It's a learning process.
Yes.
But I am encouraging you. Oil paint is a medium that is incredibly expressive, incredibly versatile. But a lot of the expression you can do with oil painting is around the brushwork and the paint application. And those wonderful spontaneous mixtures you get with wet into wet. So I'm just encouraging you to explore that.
Great.
I would like to be more spontaneous. I feel like my stuff always looks really staged because
It's still real stiff, right? After when
you're still, and I don't discourage this, but you're all basically doing line drawings and then filling them in.
Yes.
Which is somewhat limiting.
Yes.
And what I was trying to show you here, and you know, this will be archived tomorrow, right, Cassandra?
Yeah.
So you can, I mean, you're probably not going to want to go and look at all of this again, but you might want to look at some little bits of it just to see how you can use paint more loosely and maybe how you can mix up some of the colors. As far as Rembrandt's palette, just create a palette that's as close as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Go for it.
But
you don't need two blues. I put the two blues. He didn't use both blues at the same time. Those are the two blues that he would use alternately, actually. So. But
then, Anthony, also with all those earth tones, I mean, I don't have a bunch of the colors you use to mix his colors. I would